I heard my daughter whisper on the phone. Once Dad signs, the Waller $1,000 estate is ours. The words pierced me deeper than any wound. After decades of sacrifice for one, she was plotting to erase me from my own home. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Quietly. I called my old lawyer, and together we prepared every document, every piece of proof. When she filed for guardianship, thinking I was too weak to fight, I walked into court and placed her forged signature before the judge. Her smile vanished. The truth didn't just save my estate. It exposed the greed that nearly destroyed our family. Follow this story until the end. Hit subscribe, and comment the city you're watching from, so I know how far my story reaches. Evening settled heavy over the brick house. That kind of stillness Houston knew well in June. The air conditioner hummed a steady backdrop, and the faint rattle of cicadas slipped through the open window. Plates dried in the rack by the sink, yet something in the house felt unsettled, as if the walls themselves were listening. From the kitchen, muffled words carried through the narrow hall. Darlene's voice, low, quick, clipped, threaded the silence. Only fragments reached me. Transfer. Signatures. Once it's done. The syllables were sharp, jagged. Each one pricked like a thorn in the quiet. The instinct was to rise, to confront her outright. But my legs refused. Years had trained me to weigh silence heavier than noise. Standing there, ears straining, I let the air press close, wondering what she was planning behind those half-heard words. Something tightened across my chest. Not panic exactly, but unease growing root by root. I lingered near the hall, pretending to glance at the photos framed on the wall, birthdays, graduations, ordinary moments now stiff in glass. The irony wasn't lost. That house had been built on decades of labor, hours that bent the body but steadied the roof above us. To hear whispers about signatures under its rafters was like finding termites in a beam, quiet, hidden, destructive. Later that evening, the doorbell chimed. Darlene welcomed friends with a cheer that never reached me. The living room filled with chatter, the clink of glasses, the faint bite of bourbon. I kept to the recliner at the edge. A figure painted into the background. Troy Haskins, her closest friend, noticed me eventually. His grin was broad, careless, the kind that thrived in other people's discomfort. So, Luther, he said, voice pitched just enough for the others to hear. Still hanging on to this big house? A man your age should be thinking about retirement homes, not real estate. The room rippled with laughter, quick and shallow. It wasn't the joke itself that stung, but the echo of it bouncing off familiar walls. I didn't offer him the satisfaction of a reply. Silence can cut sharper than words, and mine carried years behind it. Their laughter spilled across the room like spilled liquor, staining everything it touched. I sat still, fingers pressed against the armrest, eyes tracing the hardwood that had felt every step of my life. In that moment, the house was no longer a home but a stage, and I was cast as the relic in the corner. When the guests finally left and the house returned to its quiet hum, the shadows seemed longer, heavier. Glasses sat half-drained on coasters, their condensation leaving rings that wouldn't vanish. I walked toward my study, each step carrying weight I couldn't shake. Inside, the desk waited. The drawer slid open with the scrape of wood, and there lay the folder, deed, tax bills, clean papers tucked neat in manila. Not memories, not symbols, proof. Proof of years spent steadying this place through storms, literal and otherwise. Tonight, the folder felt less like documentation and more like a shield. The whispers, the laughter, they weren't stray moments. They were pieces in a pattern, too sharp to ignore. This wasn't idle banter. It was a move in a plan. My unease shifted, hardened into something heavier. Closing the drawer, I sat in the stillness. The house, for all its bricks and beams, no longer offered comfort. Instead, it held the echo of Troy's sneer and the clipped edge of Darlene's call. They thought age meant weakness, that silence meant surrender. Lying back that night, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan circling slow, A thought anchored itself deep. They believed the fight had gone out of me, but they had no idea what I'd been preparing for all my life. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds, spilling across the hardwood floor. The quiet of the house was broken by the faint scrape of paper against wood. At first, it barely registered, but when my eyes focused on the doorway, I noticed an envelope lying there. Reaching down, I picked it up. The handwriting on the front was neat, almost rehearsed. For Dad. I slipped a finger under the seal and pulled out the contents. A crisp document slid free, dense with legal phrases. At first glance, it looked harmless. An authorization form for financial handling, but the wording struck me as slippery. Estate transfers, management authority, signatures, the kind of paper a man signs once, only to find everything he worked for suddenly belongs to someone else. Before I could study it further, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Darlene appeared in the doorway, her smile a little too quick, her tone too light. "Morning, Dad?" she said, walking in with a cup of coffee. "I thought I'd save you some trouble. That's just paperwork to make things easier for all of us. You know, in case you don't want to deal with the details anymore." I folded the paper, slipping it back into the envelope. "I'll take a look later. These things, they take time." Her eyes flickered, impatience behind the smile. "It's simple. No need to drag it out. Just sign, and we won't have to think about it again." I nodded as if considering it, though the decision was already made. My gut told me everything I needed. This wasn't about convenience. It was about control. I'd worked too many decades, sweated through too many nights, to hand it all over because someone slipped a form under my door. Breakfast smelled of toast and bacon. Caleb shuffled into the kitchen, his hair still messy from sleep. He sat down with the careless comfort only a teenager could have. "Morning, Grandpa," he said, loading his plate. "Between bites," he added with a grin, "Mom says once the papers are signed, we'll finally have the house to ourselves." The fork in my hand froze mid-air. He said it so casually, not knowing the knife his words had just driven into me. My grandson, innocent, unaware of the weight of what he'd confessed. I forced myself to smile, lowering the fork gently. "Is that so?" "Yeah," he said, oblivious. "She told Aunt Marcy on the phone last night, said it'll all be easier once it's official." The room seemed smaller. Every sound amplified, the scrape of metal on plates, the hum of the refrigerator. Caleb's voice untainted by malice. My chest tightened, but I hid it well. I'd learned long ago that silence often cuts deeper than anger. I reached over, ruffling his hair. "Eat up, son. You'll need your strength." Inside, though, a storm raged. So it was true, not just idle talk or misheard whispers. Darlene had laid out her plan, and my grandson had unknowingly confirmed it. After breakfast, I retreated to my study, the one room in the house that still felt entirely mine. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the old oak desk. I set the envelope down, then slid it into the locked drawer. The walls around me carried decades of history, photographs of my wife, gone too soon, of Darlene as a child before ambition hardened her face, of Caleb as a baby in my arms. Every nail in this house, every payment on the mortgage, every sacrifice had been a piece of me, and now, with a slip of paper, it was all to be signed away. Leaning back, I closed my eyes. Memories rose of late nights on construction sites, of years spent raising a daughter alone, of moments when I believed family meant loyalty. The contrast burned. Caleb's unguarded honesty stood in cruel relief against his mother's schemes. No, this wasn't just about a house. It was about dignity, about the life I'd built brick by brick. If they think I'll give this up so easily, they've mistaken the man I am. Evening shadows stretched across the study. I was still there, unmoving, when the knock came at the door. "Dad?" Darlene's voice was sharper now, the pretense gone. "You can't avoid this forever. We'll talk tonight." Her footsteps retreated, leaving silence in their wake. My hand rested on the locked drawer, steady and firm. Tonight, she'd learned something she'd long forgotten. The old man in this house wasn't done fighting. The dining room that evening felt less like home and more like a stage. The table was set with unusual care, candles lit, silverware lined up perfectly, plates that hadn't been touched in years. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan did little to soften the heaviness in the air. It wasn't the kind of dinner that happened by chance. It was deliberate, prepared, and meant for something more than just food. I lowered myself into the old oak chair, its creak echoing louder than usual. Caleb sat across from me, fiddling with his fork, too quiet for a boy his age. Darlene moved with a stiffness that betrayed her calm smile. She poured water, laid napkins, adjusted plates. It was all theater, and I could feel the script unfolding before she even spoke. The silence stretched long enough to sharpen the tension. Finally, her voice cut through. "Dad, we need to settle this house matter." No preamble, no small talk, not even a "how was your day?" Just straight to business. My chest tightened, but I forced my shoulders to stay loose. "The house matter?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Her eyes flickered, searching mine for weakness. "Yes, the papers are ready. We can't keep dragging this out." "It's just practical." Across the table, Caleb's fork stilled. The boy looked between us, his face drawn, as though he knew this wasn't just another family disagreement. I took a slow breath, letting the weight of the years steady me. "Why the rush, Darlene? Why is it so urgent that I sign away something I've worked my whole life for?" Her smile thinned. "Because, Dad, you're being stubborn. You've done enough. You've had your time. Don't you think it's selfish to hold on when the family needs stability?" The words were sharp, dressed in concern but dripping with accusation. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "I know exactly what I'm signing and what I'm not." Caleb shifted, discomfort plain on his young face. His eyes pleaded for peace, but peace wasn't on the table tonight. Darlene leaned forward, her voice rising. "So you don't trust me? After everything I've done, after all I've taken care of, you think I'd betray you?" Her lip quivered, a perfect picture of hurt daughter, but I'd seen enough in life to know the difference between true pain and a performance. These were tears rehearsed, ready for the spotlight. Caleb looked stricken, caught in the crossfire. He reached out as though to comfort her, but his hand hung in the air, unsure. The boy wanted to believe his mother, but doubt was creeping in. I didn't raise my voice, didn't slam my fist on the table. The strength was in the restraint. Crocodile tears don't change the truth, and they won't wash away betrayal. Her face hardened, the act slipping as quickly as it had appeared. She pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loud against the wood floor. Caleb shrank at the sound. I stood, gathering what remained of my dignity and leaving the half-eaten meal untouched. "Dinner's over," I said simply. Turning toward my study, I could feel the burn of her stare on my back. I had almost reached the door when her voice rang out, sharp and unmasked. "If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will." The words struck not with surprise, but with confirmation. She was done hiding her intent. In the quiet of my study, I placed a hand on the desk where the deed lay locked away. My pulse slowed, clarity setting in. Tomorrow would bring the next move in this battle, and I needed to be ready. The morning sunlight cut across the kitchen tiles, soft but relentless, reminding me of the long night I'd just endured. The dinner with Darlene had left me with a bitter taste, one that even strong coffee couldn't wash away. I sat quietly at the table, staring at the steam rising from my cup, when a firm knock broke the silence. It wasn't the casual tap of a neighbor or the uncertain knock of a delivery boy. It was measured, deliberate. When I opened the door, there stood Marshall Keene, my old friend, a man I hadn't seen in months, though we had spoken often enough over the years. He looked heavier in the shoulders, his briefcase worn but sturdy in his grip. "Luther." He greeted me with a nod, his voice low. "Mind if I come in?" Something in his tone made me step aside without question. He set his briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid out a folder thick with papers. His eyes didn't meet mine right away. That alone told me trouble was sitting in my kitchen. "She's moving fast," he said, at last locking eyes with me. "Darlene's been making calls. Luther, banks, real estate offices, even a legal inquiry about power of attorney." My chest tightened. I had suspected, yes, but suspicion is a shadow. Marshall had brought me the cold light of fact. He flipped through the papers, pointing to notes he'd gathered. "She's framing this as concern for your well-being, saying you're overwhelmed, that you need someone to manage things for you. On paper, it looks sympathetic. In truth, it's a trap." I sat back, my knuckles pressing into the edge of the table. The quiet unease of last night now hardened into something sharper. "She's already laying the tracks," I muttered. Marshall leaned forward. "If she gets a single signature, or if the banks start taking her word over yours, this house, your savings, it'll slip right out from under you." I nodded slowly, holding his gaze. "And she thinks I'll roll over, that I'll be too tired, too old to fight back." "Are you?" he asked bluntly. I let the silence hang, then I shook my head. Not a chance. The conversation moved deeper, every word cutting through the quiet of the house. Marshall explained how she'd already spoken with 2 institutions, trying to plant the idea that she was preparing to step in on my behalf. He spoke of her persistence, the way she pressed for quick answers. Anger threatened to boil, but I forced it to cool, letting it harden into resolve instead. Anger clouds judgment. What I needed now was clarity. I pictured the decades of labor that built this home, the long hours, the lonely nights, the scrimping and saving. Every sacrifice had been made with her in mind, to give her stability, and now she meant to turn it against me. Marshall's voice cut through my thoughts. "She's clever, Luther, but I know her game. If you don't prepare now, she'll corner you before you realize it." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "Then we prepare. She's underestimated me before. She'll do it again." His expression softened, touched with the bond we'd shared over years of trust. "If this ends up in court, I'll be right there beside you, not just as your lawyer, as your friend." A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. "Good. Because if my daughter wants a battle, she'll get one, but on my terms." Marshall gathered his papers, tucking them back into the briefcase. We exchanged a firm handshake at the door, the kind of handshake that carried weight, a promise unspoken. As he walked down the steps, I lingered in the doorway. That's when I noticed her. Darlene stood at the edge of the porch, half hidden in the morning light, phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't surprised to see Marshall leaving. She was calculating, watching, her voice hushed into the receiver. When her eyes caught mine, she quickly turned away, her free hand tightening on the railing. The knot in my stomach grew heavier. She was already 3 steps ahead in her mind, already speaking to someone else who could further her plan. I stayed there, unmoving, watching as she disappeared into the side yard. The quiet hung heavy, filled with the sound of a mockingbird calling from the oak tree. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. The living room felt smaller that evening, as though the air itself had thickened with tension. Darlene stood near the mantel, arms folded tight, her jaw set in a way that told me she hadn't come for conversation. She had come for a fight. Her voice carried no trace of the daughter I once knew. "Dad, it's time you stop pretending. This house isn't yours to cling to anymore. You need to sign those papers. Tonight." The words came sharp, calculated. Each one was a demand, not a request. My heart beat slow and steady, the way it used to before I walked into a factory meeting where everyone expected me to back down. Age doesn't dull that kind of resolve. "I've lived in this house longer than you've been alive," I answered, my voice even. "I built it, paid for every brick, and I won't be signing anything because you decided the time has come." Her eyes narrowed. She hated the calmness more than she would have hated shouting. She thrived on rattling people, but silence was a wall she couldn't break. Before she could lash out again, Caleb wandered in. He carried the same restless energy he always did after school, shuffling through the hallway with a soda can in his hand. He stopped cold when he saw us, two storms on the edge of collision. "Everything okay?" he asked, his young voice unsure. Darlene's face shifted instantly, from anger to sweetened concern. She beckoned him closer, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Of course, honey. We were just talking about the future. Don't you think Grandpa should let us start fresh here? A bigger life for you? More space to call your own?" The boy looked down, caught in the tug-of-war he didn't ask for. After a pause too long, he muttered, "Yeah, I guess." The words hit harder than I expected, not because he meant them, but because of how they were pulled out of him. His voice didn't hold conviction, only pressure. My chest tightened. I looked directly at Darlene. "Don't do that. Don't use him as a pawn. He's a child. He deserves better than being caught in the middle of your schemes." Her mask cracked for a moment. Frustration flashed across her face, and her grip on Caleb's shoulder tightened before she let him go. He slunk toward the stairs, escaping the battlefield without another word. Once he was gone, Darlene's patience snapped. Her tone turned low, threatening. "If you don't sign, you'll regret it. Don't think your stubborn pride will protect you. I know people who can make this happen without you." The threat landed heavy in the room. For a brief second, I felt the sting, not fear, but the weight of realizing how far my own daughter had drifted. I didn't answer. Words weren't what she wanted. She wanted to see me crack. Instead, I rose from my chair, every movement deliberate, and walked past her toward the staircase. The wood creaked under my steps, louder than her shallow breaths behind me. In my study upstairs, the silence wrapped itself around me. I opened a locked drawer and placed Marshall Keene's business card squarely on the desk. The time for silence was done. If she wanted war, she was going to find out what kind of man she was really up against. The morning light crept through the blinds of my study, laying stripes across the desk where papers had sat undisturbed overnight. A sealed envelope rested at the center, stamped with the logo of my bank. Something in my gut tightened the moment I saw it. Official mail rarely brought good news. Tearing it open, my hands stiff from years of labor, I scanned the contents. The letter confirmed a transfer request, one I had supposedly signed. My eyes fixed on the signature at the bottom. The letters curled and dipped like mine, but it wasn't mine. Not a chance in hell. A surge of disbelief mixed with anger rose. This wasn't just whispered talk in the kitchen anymore. This was bold, calculated, and criminal. The only person who could benefit from this fraud was Darlene, my own daughter. For a moment, the air seemed too heavy to breathe. All the sacrifices of a lifetime, every brick laid, every dollar earned, reduced to a piece of paper carrying a stolen version of my name. The betrayal cut sharper than any knife. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it down. My resolve hardened. If she wanted a fight, I wasn't backing down. Marshall picked up on the second ring. His voice was steady, seasoned, the way a lawyer who had seen decades of battles ought to sound. I told him I needed to see him right away. He didn't hesitate. "Bring it here, Luther." "Don't waste time." At his office, I laid the paper in front of him. He adjusted his glasses, reading each line slowly, then looked up with the expression of a man who'd seen too much but was still shocked by this one. "This is fraud, plain and simple," Marshall said, tapping the forged signature. "A felony, Luther. If this moves forward, she could face prison." The weight of his words pressed down. I hadn't wanted to think of it going that far. She was my daughter. Yet what she had done wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate theft, dressed up in family ties. Marshall leaned back. "We'll need to strike fast and strike clean. Evidence is your shield now. Everything. Dates, signatures, witnesses. No slip-ups." I nodded, though my jaw clenched tight. I won't let her bury me before my time. The rest of the day turned into preparation. Marshall and I worked like soldiers mapping a campaign. I pulled out old files, mortgage records, notarized deeds, insurance documents, all with my true signature, each one a brick in the wall I was building. We compared the forged signature to the real ones. The differences were clear: the slight tilt of the L, the pressure on the pen strokes. Marshall arranged them side by side, photographing and cataloging everything. By late afternoon, I drove home. A man carrying not just papers, but proof. Proof that I wasn't delusional. Proof that betrayal wasn't a phantom I'd conjured out of paranoia. In my study, I slid the forged document into a thick folder. On its front, I wrote one word in black marker: evidence. The folder went into the drawer, locked tight, the key tucked into my pocket. I sat back in my chair, feeling the fatigue settle into my bones. But there was also a strange sense of clarity. She thought she could trick me, wear me down, corner me into surrender. But she had underestimated the stubbornness that had carried me through life. As the sun set, I heard her voice outside the door, low and urgent. Through the thin walls, fragments carried. "Don't worry. He won't stand a chance." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. She was wrong. She had no idea what I still had left in me. The change came slowly, like a chill creeping under a door. At first, it was only a few neighbors failing to wave back as I strolled down the block. Then came the whispers, conversations cut short when I walked by, eyes darting away like guilty children. Something was different, and it wasn't hard to guess why. Evelyn Draper caught me that morning while I was taking out the trash. She leaned close, voice low so no one else would hear. "Luther, I think you should know. Your daughter's been telling folks you're not well. She says you're getting confused, forgetting things. She's making it sound like you can't take care of yourself anymore." For a moment, it felt as if the air had been knocked out of me. Declining mental state? That was the lie she'd chosen. I straightened my back, the weight of her words pressing hard. I wasn't losing my mind. I was sharper now than I'd ever been, because betrayal has a way of sharpening a man. 2 days later, at a community luncheon at the local church, her poison spread further. Darlene was there, chatting with people I'd known for decades. I could hear her voice, soft enough to sound concerned, but pointed enough to wound. "I just worry about Dad," she said to a cluster of neighbors. "He forgets where he puts things, signs papers without realizing what they are. It's heartbreaking, really." Every word dripped with false compassion, but the effect was real. I saw the looks, sympathetic, pitying. Some nodded, as if they already believed. Others glanced at me with that quiet suspicion that stings worse than open hostility. I didn't interrupt. I didn't storm over and defend myself. I sat at my table, head high, fork steady in my hand. If she wanted to paint me as weak, I would answer with silence, the kind of silence that revealed more strength than shouting ever could. My calm presence left her words hanging, hollow echoes in a room where I had always been respected. Later that evening, Evelyn showed up at my door with a plate of peach cobbler, her way of reminding me that kindness still lived on our street. She set the dish down and fixed me with her steady eyes. "Don't let her break you down, Luther. Not everyone's buying what she's selling, and if this goes to court, I'll stand beside you. I've seen enough of your character over the years to know the truth." Relief washed through me, quiet but powerful. To have even one voice ready to stand with mine made the world feel less hostile. I thanked her, though words felt small compared to the weight of her loyalty. As the night closed in, I sat at my desk, determination firming into steel. Let her drag me through the mud. I would walk through it without sinking. She underestimated what decades of grit had built inside me. Just as I was about to turn in, I checked the mailbox one last time. Inside, tucked into a plain envelope with no return address, was a single sheet of paper. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from the chill of recognition. It was a medical note, supposedly from a local physician, declaring me unfit to manage my own affairs. I hadn't seen this doctor in years. The signature was scrawled, but even at a glance, I knew it was forged. My daughter wasn't done with whispers. She was ready to put it on paper. The living room had been transformed into something more like a meeting hall than the heart of a family home. Darlene insisted on this family discussion, demanding that everyone be present. She arranged the chairs in a stiff semicircle, as though the setting itself would lend her authority. I sat in the largest chair at the head of the arrangement, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the armrests. Marshall Keene occupied a quieter seat to my right, his lawyer's eyes scanning the room with measured detachment. Evelyn Draper sat near the edge, her face set, her composure betraying that she wasn't here as just a neighbor. She was here as a witness. Caleb fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, his unease clear. The silence stretched until Darlene broke it. "We need to address the obvious. Dad, you can't keep pretending everything is fine. You're not capable of managing this house anymore." Her voice carried a sharp edge, the kind meant to cut before anyone could mount a defense. Her eyes flashed toward me, waiting for a reaction. I didn't offer one. Instead, I let her words hang in the stale air, giving her enough rope to tangle herself. She pressed on, sliding a paper onto the table. "This is a medical assessment. It says you're unfit to manage your own affairs. It's not safe for you to keep this place in your hands." The weight of her accusation landed, but only for a moment. Slowly, I leaned forward, pulling a different folder from my lap. The paper she had displayed trembled faintly in her hands when I set my evidence beside it. "You forged my name once," I said evenly, my voice low but resonant. "And now you forge my health." Gasps rippled across the room. Caleb looked from me to his mother in disbelief. Marshall cleared his throat and nodded toward the documents I laid out. "This," he said, lifting the bank notice and the medical note, "is fraudulent. Signatures and seals that don't align. The evidence is clear." Darlene's face flushed, but she tried to hold her ground. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped at Marshall. "You're just his old friend. Of course you'll defend him." Before Marshall could respond, Evelyn rose from her seat. Her voice was steady, resolute. "I overheard you, Darlene, multiple times. Phone calls about making things happen, and papers he won't understand." Evelyn's eyes cut through the tension like a blade. "You've been plotting this for weeks, and if it comes to court, I'll testify." Caleb's shoulders slumped. "Mom, is that true?" His voice was small, the kind of voice a son uses when he already knows the answer but still clings to hope. Darlene's expression faltered for a flicker of a second, but she quickly regained her mask. "I did it for you. Caleb, for us. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore." The boy shook his head, his gaze falling to the floor. Silence lingered heavy. I stood then, my body slower but my voice strong. "If this is the path you've chosen, then I will meet you on it, in court." The words hung in the air like a final gavel strike. Darlene's hands balled into fists. She slammed the table, rattling the glasses. "You'll regret crossing me, Dad. This isn't over." I didn't flinch. Marshall placed a calming hand on my shoulder, while Evelyn remained firm at my side. Caleb, caught between blood and conscience, sat motionless, the cracks in his loyalty widening before all of us. The meeting dissolved, but the war had only just begun. That night, as the house fell into uneasy silence, I knew the lines were drawn deeper than ever. The knock came sharp and early, breaking the quiet of my Monday morning. The sun had barely risen above the roofs in Houston when I shuffled toward the door, still clutching the cup of coffee I hadn't yet tasted. A man in a neat suit stood there, his expression clipped and professional. "Mr. Sloan?" he asked. "Yes." He handed me a heavy envelope. "You've been served." The words landed heavier than the papers in my hand. I closed the door slowly, the sound of the latch echoing through my otherwise still house. Sitting down at the kitchen table, I slid open the envelope. The legal language screamed at me even before I finished the first page. Petition for guardianship. Petition for control of estate. My daughter's name stamped across the top. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was the weight of betrayal. Still, my voice stayed steady as I read the opening lines aloud, as if speaking them would strip them of power. The respondent, Luther Sloan, is alleged to be of diminished capacity. A hollow laugh escaped me. Diminished capacity. I built this house with sweat dripping down my back, brick by brick. I worked years of double shifts to pay off the mortgage. I raised my daughter alone after tragedy left us both gasping for stability. Now, she was telling the courts I couldn't manage my own affairs. I set the envelope down carefully, flattening the creases as though I were handling a weapon. My coffee sat untouched. Determination slowly replaced the ache in my chest. If she wanted to take me to court, then court was where I would fight. By mid-morning, I was in Marshal Keene's office, the envelope tucked under my arm like a shield. He looked up as I entered, the lines on his face deepening with concern when he saw the papers. "Luther," he said quietly. I had a feeling this was coming. I handed him the stack, watching as his sharp lawyer's eyes darted across the pages. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "She's gone for guardianship. She's claiming you're unfit, citing medical records that—" He trailed off, glancing at me. "They're fake," I finished for him. Marshall nodded. "I know. But in court, lies have a way of looking convincing if we don't act fast. If we let this slide, and you'll lose everything, the house, your autonomy, your dignity, she'll control it all." His words cut deep, but they steadied me too. I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms. I didn't spend 78 years surviving storms just to hand over my life on a platter. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the office clock marking each second that passed. Then Marshall's brow furrowed. He flipped back through the petition, his finger tapping at a line near the top. "Hold on. This filing, it's in Travis County." I blinked. "That's Austin." "Exactly." His eyes lit up. "Luther, this is a mistake. Jurisdictional error. She filed in the wrong county. The property, your residence, everything tied to this case is in Harris County. This could sink her petition before it even begins." The words settled over me like a lifeline. My daughter had been meticulous, but arrogance often breeds sloppiness. For the first time since opening that envelope, the weight in my chest loosened. As if to underline the moment, my phone buzzed. Caleb's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then answered. His voice was small, guilty. "Grandpa, I'm sorry. Mom made me do something last week. I didn't understand, but I think it was about some papers. I didn't mean—" I cut in gently. "It's all right, son. You just told me more than you realize. We'll talk soon." When the call ended, I looked back at Marshall. The pieces were falling into place. My grandson's innocence had slipped another thread loose in Darlene's web. Marshall leaned forward, voice firm. "Luther, this mistake in her filing could be our weapon, but we'll have to move fast, before she realizes what she's done." I pressed my palms against the table, feeling strength return. "Then let's move fast. If my daughter wants a courtroom battle, baby, then that's where I'll face her, with the truth at my side." That night, the papers still sat on my kitchen table. I looked at them not as threats, but as evidence of a daughter's desperation. Betrayal runs deep, but so does resolve, and tomorrow, the first summons would arrive, pulling this family storm into the public eye. Marshall's office smelled faintly of old books and burnt coffee. Stacks of papers towered between us, and his desk lamp cast long shadows across the room. He leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Luther, this won't be easy," he said, tapping the guardianship petition Darlene had filed. "She's coming hard, and she's building a story that you can't care for yourself anymore." A knot tightened in my chest. The house I'd worked my whole life for was now being painted as too much for me to handle. My daughter wanted it stripped from my hands, and she was willing to lie to make it happen. Marshall slid a legal pad toward me. "We'll need testimony, not just documents, not just signatures. People who can vouch for your clarity, your independence. That's how we counter her claims." My eyes fell on the list he'd scribbled. Neighbors, old friends, even my doctor. The reality pressed down heavy. This wasn't just a family quarrel anymore. It was a battle in which I'd have to bear my life before strangers. I cleared my throat, my voice low but firm. "She thinks she's already won, but I won't let her bury me while I'm still breathing." Marshall gave me a look that mixed concern with respect. "Then we prepare for war." The next evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table when a knock startled me. It was Evelyn Draper. my neighbor of nearly 20 years, holding a paper bag of groceries. "You've looked thinner, Luther," she said, setting the bag down. "Figured you might need a hand." Her presence softened the house. We brewed tea, and as the steam curled upward, she leaned closer, her voice dropping. "I need to tell you something. The other night, I overheard Darlene on her phone. She was bragging about taking control soon, about how it was all but done." The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. What did was Evelyn's next sentence. "If you need me in court, I'll stand up for you. I'll say what I heard." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Gratitude washed through me, but so did sorrow. It should have been my own flesh and blood standing with me, not a neighbor. Still, Evelyn's eyes held no hesitation. "You'd really do that?" I asked quietly. "I would," she said firmly, "because what she's doing isn't right." My throat tightened. "Then you may have just given me the one thing I was starting to lose, hope." Late that night, the house sat in silence, the kind that makes you hear every creak of the floorboards. The phone rang, and I answered, heart skipping when I heard Caleb's voice. "Grandpa?" His tone was hushed, shaky. I need to tell you something." "What is it, son?" There was a pause, then a rush of words. "I might have recorded something by accident. Mom was on the phone, talking about papers and how she'd make sure the judge saw you as unfit. I didn't mean to, but it's on my phone." My breath caught. Evidence, hard, undeniable evidence. "Caleb," I said slowly, "that could change everything." "I can't send it yet," he whispered. "She checks my phone, but I'll find a way, I promise." I closed my eyes, torn between pride and fear. "You're brave, Caleb, but be careful. Don't let her suspect a thing." The line went quiet for a moment. Then his small voice. "I don't want to lose you, Grandpa." The words pierced deeper than any legal threat. After he hung up, I sat in the stillness, staring at the phone in my hand. My grandson, caught in the middle of a storm he didn't create, now held the key that could save me, or destroy him if his mother discovered it. "My own grandson holds the key," I whispered into the dim room. "But can he bear the weight of it?" The thought lingered long after I set the phone down, the silence pressing heavy as I realized the next summons would drag all of us into the public arena. The courthouse stood like a fortress against the morning sun, its stone walls and towering pillars catching the light in a way that made them feel even more imposing. Walking through the heavy glass doors, there was a pull in my chest, part dread, part resolve. This wasn't just another building. It was where the truth about my own daughter would be tested before strangers. The hallway echoed with shoes and hushed conversations. Marshall walked steady at my side, his briefcase clasped like a weapon of choice. "Remember," he whispered as we reached the double doors, "truth stands taller than lies. Just let it stand." Inside, the courtroom was colder than I expected. The air conditioning hummed, and the long rows of benches held a scattering of people, some curious neighbors, some who had likely heard the rumors Darlene spread. I felt their eyes brush against me, measuring, wondering if the whispers were true. Then Darlene entered, heels sharp against the floor, her chin raised as if she owned the room. She avoided looking at me. That simple act cut deeper than words. Caleb trailed behind her, eyes low, shoulders hunched, carrying the weight of things he wasn't old enough to carry. We took our seats. The bailiff called for order, and the judge, a stern man with deep lines across his forehead, began. My heart beat steady. I'd been through storms before, but never one like this. When it was Darlene's turn, she rose with polished grace. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, each word crafted like a blade. "My father," she began, pausing to catch the judge's eye, "is no longer capable of managing his affairs. He forgets things. He leaves bills unpaid. He struggles with even the simplest responsibilities." The gallery shifted. I heard murmurs ripple. She pressed on, her tone dripping with feigned concern. "This is not about taking anything from him. It's about protecting him. protecting his estate, his legacy, before it's lost through neglect. I only want what's best for him. She painted me as reckless, confused, incapable. Every phrase was a dagger dressed in silk. My hands clenched under the table. The judge watched carefully, his pen scratching notes. Marshall placed a steadying hand near mine. I kept silent, though fury burned hot in my chest. To hear my own flesh and blood stand there, twisting lies into a portrait of concern, it was almost unbearable. Across the room, Caleb squirmed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Evelyn sat 2 rows back, posture rigid, eyes locked on Darlene with quiet fire. Then Marshall rose. His calm presence filled the room without raising his voice. "Your Honor," he began, sliding a document onto the bench. "My client is accused of being financially reckless, but here is a current bank statement showing every account balanced, every bill paid on time." He produced another paper. "And here is a property record confirming that Mr. Sloan has not missed a single tax payment in decades. Not one." The sound of pages turning echoed louder than it should have. A gasp carried from the gallery. Even the judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses to scan the records. I caught sight of Darlene. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her eyes darted toward Evelyn, then to the floor. The confidence she carried into the room seemed to flicker. Marshall's voice cut through the silence. Neglect, confusion, irresponsibility. Those are not words that describe this man. The documents speak for themselves. If there are further accusations, we welcome the chance to examine them under truth. The judge set the papers down, tapping his gavel lightly. "We will need to hear from other witnesses." Relief washed over me, subtle but strong. The storm wasn't over, but the wind had shifted. Evelyn sat straighter, ready. Caleb's hands twisted in his lap, his face pale, caught between fear and guilt. I exhaled slowly. The next voices to speak could decide everything. The courtroom felt colder that afternoon, as though the walls themselves understood the weight of what was about to unfold. I sat straight-backed, hands folded, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. At 78, my body had its limits, but the spirit inside me had never been sharper. Today, it would be tested. Evelyn Draper took the stand first. My longtime neighbor walked with calm assurance, her presence steadying me even before she spoke. She raised her hand, swore her oath, and began recounting what she had heard on those evenings when voices carried through thin suburban walls. "I heard Darlene tell her friends that she would secure her father's estate soon," Evelyn said clearly. "She mentioned the house, the accounts, even the retirement fund. I recall her words exactly. Once the paperwork is done, it's all mine." Murmurs rippled across the room. Darlene shot up from her seat, voice shrill. "She's lying." The judge's gavel struck once. "Order, Miss Draper. Continue." Evelyn did not flinch. She listed dates, times, even names of the people Darlene bragged to. Her testimony aligned with what Caleb had let slip weeks before. The precision left no room for imagination. As I listened, my chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from the heavy relief of truth breaking through the fog of lies. For months, I had carried suspicion like a stone in my gut. Hearing Evelyn lay it bare was like air rushing back into a suffocating room. When Evelyn stepped down, she gave me a small nod. Gratitude swelled in my chest, tempered by sorrow that it had taken neighbors, not family, to defend my dignity. The bailiff called Caleb next. My grandson looked so small as he shuffled toward the stand, his shoulders hunched, his voice trembling when he swore the oath. He was just a boy caught between two worlds, his mother's ambition and his grandfather's truth. "Tell us what you heard," Marshall prompted gently. Caleb's lips quivered. He looked at me, then down at his shoes. I heard Mom on the phone. She said Grandpa didn't know what he was doing anymore. She said once the papers were signed, we'd finally have the house to ourselves." His voice cracked, the words spilling out with the raw honesty of youth. Gasps filled the courtroom again. Darlene's face went pale, then flushed crimson. She leaned forward, whispering harshly, "Stop it, Caleb. Stop right now. The judge raised a hand. He will finish. Tears welled in Caleb's eyes, but he kept going. I didn't understand at first, but I knew it wasn't right. Grandpa's not confused. He's not sick. He takes care of everything. I'm sorry, Grandpa. My throat closed as I listened. The painful irony cut deep. Innocence had become the sharpest weapon against corruption. My own grandson, used as a pawn, was now the one pulling her schemes into the light. And the courtroom hushed as the judge shuffled papers, eyes narrowing at Darlene. Her earlier confidence had crumbled. She sat rigid, jaw tight, knuckles white against the table. Finally, the gavel struck again. The court has reviewed testimony and evidence. Ms. Knox's petition for guardianship is denied. The claims regarding Mr. Sloane's mental fitness are unsupported and contradicted by multiple witnesses. Mr. Sloane retains full control of his estate. It was done. The whispers returned, but this time they carried approval, even admiration. Some shook their heads at Darlene. Others cast sympathetic glances my way. I hardly noticed. My focus lingered on her slumped figure, ambition unraveling in real time. She had fought to strip me of my dignity and instead exposed her own deceit. Relief washed through me, but it was not pure triumph. Victory carried its own grief. A daughter lost to greed, a family fractured in front of strangers. Even as I held on to my estate, I mourned the cost. The judge dismissed the session, but I asked to speak. Rising slowly, I faced the court. My voice carried the weight of 78 years. Family built on greed destroys itself. Truth and dignity outlast betrayal. Money is not a legacy. Integrity is. Honor is. What you pass down in values will outlive any bank account. Let this be a reminder to every son, daughter, and parent here. Love must be earned, not demanded. The room fell silent, my words echoing louder than any gavel strike. As I walked out into the fading Texas sunlight, Marshall was at my side. Evelyn smiled faintly, her steady hand brushing my arm in quiet solidarity. Caleb rushed to me, clutching my hand tightly. For the first time in months, I felt the warmth of real family, fragile, wounded, but still there. The scar of betrayal would remain, but justice had given me back my voice. In the end, I realized something deeper. Wealth can be stolen, homes can be lost, but the true inheritance we leave behind is the example we set. Final line. In the end, justice gave me back my voice, but it also taught me that love must be earned, not demanded.